Chapter 3. Barry Sindler, divorce lawyer to the stars, shifted in his chair. He was trying to pay attention to the client seated across the desk from him, but he was having trouble. The client was a nerd named Dale, who ran some biotech company. The guy talked abstractly, no emotion, practically no expression on his face. Even though he was telling how his wife was screwing around on him. Dale must have been a terrible husband. But Barry wasn't sure how much money there was in this case. It seemed that the wife had all the money. Dale droned on. How his first suspicions arose when he called her from Las Vegas. How he discovered the charge slips for the hotel that she went to every Wednesday. How he waited in the lobby and caught her checking in with a local tennis pro. Same old California story. Barry had heard it 100 times. Didn't these people know they were walking cliches? Average husband catches wife with a tennis pro. They wouldn't even use that one on Desperate Housewives. Barry gave up trying to listen. He had too much on his mind this morning. He had lost Kukovich case, and it was all over town. Just because DNA tests had shown that it wasn't the billionaire's baby. And then the court wouldn't award him his fees, even though he had cut them to a measly $1.4 million. The judge gave him a quarter of that. Every damn lawyer in town was gloating, because they all had it in for Barry Sindler. He had heard that LA Magazines was doing a big story on the case, sure to be unfavorable to Barry. Not that he gave a crap about that. The truth was, the more he got portrayed as an unprincipled, ruthless prick, the more clients flocked to him. Because when it came to a divorce, people wanted a ruthless prick. They lined up for one, and Barry Sindler was without a doubt the most ruthless, unscrupulous, publicity-hungry, self-aggrandizing, stop-at-nothing son of a bitch divorce lawyer in Southern California, and proud of it. No, Barry didn't worry about any of those things. He didn't even worry about the house he was building in Montana for Dennis and her 2 rotten kids. He didn't worry about the renovations on their house in Holmby Hills. Even the kitchen alone was costing $500,000, and Dennis kept changing the plans. Dennis was a serial renovator. It was a disease. No. Barry Sindler worried about just one thing. The lease. He had one whole floor in an office building on Wilshire, and Donnie's 23 attorneys in his office. None of them worth a shit. But seeing all of them at their desks impressed the clients. And they could do the minor stuff like take depositions and file delaying motions. Stuff Barry didn't want to be bothered with. Barry knew that litigations was a war of attrition, especially in custody cases. The goal was to run the cost as high as you could and stretch the proceedings out as long as you could, because that way Barry earned the largest possible fees, and the spouse eventually got tired of the endless delays, the new filings, and of course the spiraling costs. Even the richest of them eventually got tired. By and large, husbands were sensible. They wanted to get on with their lives. Buy a new house, move in with a new girlfriend, get a nice blowjob. They wanted custody issues settled, but the wives usually wanted revenge. So Barry kept things from being settled year after year until the husband caved. Millionaires, billionaires, celebrity assholes, it didn't matter. They all caved in the end. People said it wasn't a good strategy for the kids. Well, screw the kids. If the clients cared anything about the kids, they wouldn't get divorced in the first place. They'd stay married and miserable like everybody else because the nerd had said something that jogged him back to attention. "I'm sorry," Barry Sindler said. "Run that by me again." "Mr. Dale, what did you just say?" "I said, I want my wife tested. I can assure you, these proceedings will test her to the limit. And of course, we'll put a detective on her. See how much she drinks, whether she does drugs, stays out all night, has lesbian affairs, all that. Standard procedure." No, Dale said. "I want her tested genetically." "For what?" "For everything," he said. "Ah," Barry said, nodding wisely. What the hell was the guy talking about? Genetic testing in a custody case? He glanced down at the papers in front of him, and the business card. Richard Rick Dale, Ph.D. Barry frowned unhappily. Only assholes put a nickname on the card. The card said he was CEO of Biogen Research Inc., some company out in Westview Village. "For example," Dale said, "I'll bet my wife has a genetic predisposition to bipolar illness. She certainly acts erratic. She might have the Alzheimer's gene. If she does, psychological tests could show early signs of Alzheimer's." "Good, very good," Barry Sindler was nodding vigorously now. This was making him happy. Fresh, new, disputed areas. Sindler loved disputed areas. Administer the psychological test. Did the test show early Alzheimer's or not? Who the fuck could say for sure? Wonderful, wonderful. Whatever the test results, they would be disputed. More days in court. More expert witnesses to interview. Battles of the doctorates. Dragging on for days. Days in court were especially lucrative. And best of all, Barry realized that this genetic testing could become standard procedure for all custody cases. Sindler was breaking new ground here. He'd get publicity for this. He leaned forward eagerly. "Go on, Mr. Dale. Test her for the diabetes genes, breast cancer, from the BRCA genes, and all the rest." And, Dale continued, "my wife might also have the gene for Huntington's disease, which causes fatal nerve degeneration. Her grandfather had Huntington's, so it's in her family. Both her parents are still young, and the disease only shows up when you're older. So my wife could be carrying the gene, and that would mean a death sentence from Huntington's. Yes, Barry Sindler said, nodding. That could render her unfit to be the primary caregiver to the children. Exactly. I'm surprised she hasn't been tested already. She doesn't want to know, Dale said. There's a 50-50 chance she may have the gene. If she does, she'll eventually develop the disease and die, writhing in dementia. But she's 28. The disease might not appear for another 20 years. So if she knew about it now, it could ruin the rest of her life. But it could also relieve her if she didn't have the gene. Too big a risk. She won't test. Any other tests you can think of? Hell yes, Dale said. That's just the beginning. I want her tested with all the current panels. There are 1,200 gene tests now. 1,200. Sindler licked his lips at the prospect. Excellent. Why had he never heard of this before? He cleared his throat. But you realize that if you do this, she will demand you be tested as well. No problem, Dale said. You've already been tested? No, I just know how to fake the lab results. Barry Sindler sat back in his chair. Perfect. Chapter 4. Beneath the high canopy of trees, the jungle floor was dark and silent. No breeze stirred the giant ferns at shoulder height. Hagar wiped sweat from his forehead, glanced back at the others, and pushed on. The expedition moved deep into the jungles of central Sumatra. No one spoke, which was the way Hagar liked it. The river was just ahead, a dugout canoe on the near bank. A rope stretched across the river at shoulder height. They crossed in two groups, Hagar standing up in the dugout, pulling them across on the rope, then going back for the others. It was silent except for the cry of a distant hornbill. They continued on the opposite bank. The jungle trail grew narrower and muddy in spots. The team didn't like that. They made a lot of noise, trying to scramble around the rut patches. Finally, one said, "How much farther is it?" It was that kid, the whiny American teenager with spots on his face. He was looking to his mother, a largish matron in a broad straw hat. "Are we almost there?" the kid whined. Hagar put his finger to his lips. "Quiet. My feet hurt." The other tourists were standing around, a cluster of bright-colored clothing, staring at the kid. "Look," Hagar whispered, "if you make noise, you won't see them." "I don't see them anyhow," the kid pouted. But he fell into line as the group moved on. Today they were mostly Americans. Hagar didn't like Americans, but they weren't the worst. The worst he had to admit were the "There, look there." The tourists were pointing ahead, excited, chattering. About 50 yards up the trail and off to the right, a juvenile male orangutan stood upright in the branches that swayed gently with his weight. Magnificent creature, reddish fur, roughly 40 pounds, distinctive white streak in the fur above his ear. Hagar had not seen him in weeks. Hagar gestured for the others to be quiet and moved up the trail. The tourists were close behind him now, stumbling, banging into one another in their excitement. "Shh," he hissed. "What's the big deal?" one said. "I thought this was a sanctuary." "Shh." "But they're protected here." "Shh." Hagar needed it quiet. He reached into his shirt pocket and pressed the record button. He unclipped his lapel mic and held it in his hand. They were now about 30 yards from the orang. They passed a sign along the trail that said Bukut Alam Orangutan Sanctuary. This was where orphaned orangs were nursed to health and reintroduced into the wild. There was a veterinary facility, a research station, a team of researchers. If it's a sanctuary, I don't understand why. George, you heard what he said. Be quiet. 20 yards now. Look, another one. 2. There. They were pointing off to the left. High in the canopy, a 1-year-old crashing through branches with an older juvenile, swinging gracefully. Hagar didn't care. He was focused on the first animal. The white-streaked orang did not move away. Now he was hanging by one hand, swinging in the air, head cocked to one side as he looked at them. The younger animals in the canopy were gone. White Streak stayed where he was and stared. 10 yards, Hagar held his microphone out in front of him. The tourists were pulling out the cameras. The orang stared directly at Hagar and made an odd sound like a cough. Dras. Hagar repeated the sound back. Dras. The orang stared at him. The curved lips moved. A sequence of guttural grunts. U stam dras valat lenmir. One of the tourists said, "Is he making those sounds?" "Yes," Hagar said. "Is he talking?" "Apes can't talk," another tourist said. "Orangs are silent. It says so in the book." Several snapped flash pictures of the hanging ape. The juvenile males showed no surprise, but the lips moved. Gen lichen dras. "Does he have a cold?" a woman asked nervously. "Sounds like he's coughing." "He's not coughing," another voice said. Hagar glanced over his shoulder. A heavy-set man at the back, a man who had struggled to keep up, red face and puffing, now held the tape recorder in his hand, pointing it toward the orang. He had a determined look on his face. He said to Hagar, "Is this some kind of trick you play?" "No," Hagar said. The man pointed to the orang. "That's Dutch," he said. "Sumatra used to be a Dutch colony. That's Dutch." "I wouldn't know," Hagar said. "I would." The animal said, "Stupid, leave me alone." And then it said, "No lights," when the camera flashes went off. "I don't know what those sounds were," Hagar said. "But you were recording them. Just out of curiosity. You had your microphone out long before the sounds began. You knew that animal would speak." "Orangs can't speak," Hagar said. "That one can." They all stared at the orangutan, still swinging from one arm. It stretches itself with the free arm. It was silent. The heavy-set man said loudly, "Gen lichin." The ape just stared, blinked slowly. "Gen lichin." The orang gave no sign of comprehension. After a moment, he swung to a nearby branch and began to climb into the air, moving easily arm on arm. Gen lichin. The ape kept climbing. The woman in the big straw hat said, I think it was just coughing or something. Hey, the heavyset man yelled. Monsieur comment Cavar. The ape continued up through the branches, swinging in an easy rhythm with its long arms. It did not look down. I thought maybe it speaks French, the man said. He shrugged. Guess not. A light rain began to drip from the canopy. The other tourists put their cameras away. One shrugged on a light, transparent raincoat. Hagar wiped the sweat from his forehead. Up ahead, 3 young orangs were scampering around, a tray of papayas on the ground. The tourists turned their attention to them. From high in the canopy came a growling sound, especially de calme. The phrase came to them clearly, surprisingly distinct in the still air. The heavyset man spun around. What? Everyone turned to look upward. That was a swear word, the teenager said. In French. I know it was a swear word. In French. Hush, his mother said. The group stared up at the canopy, searching the dense mass of dark leaves. They could not see the ape up there. The heavyset man yelled, Creste se que tu dis. There was no answer, just the crash of an animal moving through branches and the distant cry of a hornbill. Cheeky chimp chews off tourist. News of the world. Après spricht en de Schindel, Flutschi George Bush, Der Spiegel. Orang Polaire Française. Pairs match beneath a picture of Jacques Derrida. Muslim monkey berates Westerners. Weekly Standard. Monkey mouths off. Witness agape. National Enquirer. Talking chimpanzee reported in Java. New York Times. Subsequent correction printed. Polyglot primates sighted in Sumatra. Los Angeles Times. And finally, a group of tourists in Indonesia swear they were abused by an orangutan in the jungles of Borneo. According to the tourists, the ape swore at them in Dutch and French, which means it was probably a lot smarter than they were. But no recordings of the cussing chimp have turned up, leading us to conclude that if you believe this story, we have a job for you in the current administration. Plenty of talking apes there. Countdown with Keith Olbermann, MSNBC News, no correction. Chapter 5. Get this, Charlie Huggins said, looking at the television in the kitchen of his house in San Diego. The sound was turned off, but he was reading the crawl beneath. It says talking ape sighted in Sumatra. You mean it got a speeding ticket? His wife said, glancing at the screen. She was making breakfast. No, Huggins said. They must mean the ape was sighted with an S. The ape was sighted, meaning the ape could see. His wife was a high school English teacher. She liked these jokes. No, honey. The story says some people in Sumatra encountered an ape in the jungle that talked. I thought apes can't talk, his wife said. Well, that's what the story says. So it has to be a lie. You think? Now Britney Spears is not getting divorced. I'm relieved. She may be pregnant again. From the pictures, it looks like it. And Posh Spice wore a nice green dress to a gala. And Sting says he can have sex for 8 hours without stopping. Scrambled or over easy, his wife said. Tantric, apparently. I mean your eggs. scrambled. "Call the kids, will you?" she said. "Everything's almost ready." "Okay." Charlie got up from the table and headed for the stairs. When he got to the living room, the phone rang. It was the lab. In the laboratories of Radiogenomics, Inc., in the eucalyptus groves of the University of California at San Diego, Henry Kendall drummed his fingers on the countertop while he waited for Charlie to pick up. The phone rang 3 times. Where the fuck was he? Finally, Charlie's voice. "Hello?" "Charlie," Henry said, "did you hear the news?" "What news?" "The ape in Sumatra, for Christ's sake." "That has to be bullshit," Charlie said. "Why?" "Come on, Henry. You know it's bullshit." "They said the ape spoke Dutch. It's bullshit." It might have been Utenbroek's team," Kendall said. "Nah, the ape was big. 2 or 3 years old. So Utenbroek could have done it a few years ago. His team's advanced enough. Besides, those guys from Utrecht are all liars." Charlie Huggins sighed. "It's illegal in the Netherlands to do that research." "Right, which is why they would go to Sumatra to do it." "Henry, the technology's much too different. The technology's much too difficult. We're years away from making a transgenic ape. You know that." "I don't know that. You hear what Utrecht announced yesterday? They harvested bull stem cells and cultured them in mouse testicles. I would say that is difficult. I would say that is fucking cutting edge. Especially for the bulls. I don't see anything funny here. Can't you imagine the poor mice dragging around giant purple bull's balls?" "Still not laughing." "Henry," Charlie said, "are you telling me you see one report on television about a talking ape and you actually believe it?" "I'm afraid I do." "Henry," Charlie sounded exasperated. "It's television. This story is right up there with the 2-headed snake. Pull yourself together." The 2-headed snake was real. "I have to get the kids to school. I'll talk to you later." And Charlie hung up. Fucker. His wife always took the kids to school. He's avoiding me. Henry Kendall walked around the lab, stared out the window, paced some more. He took a deep breath. Of course he knew Charlie was right. It had to be a fake story. But what if it wasn't? It was true that Henry Kendall had a tendency to be high-strung. His hands sometimes shook when he spoke, especially when he was excited. And he was a bit of a klutz, always stumbling, banging into things at the lab. He had a nervous stomach. He was a worrier. But what Henry couldn't tell Charlie was that the real reason he was worried now had to do with a conversation that had taken place a week ago. It seemed meaningless at the time. Now it took on a more ominous quality. Some ditzy secretary from the National Institute of Health had called the lab and asked for Dr. Kendall. When he answered the phone, she said, "Are you Dr. Henry A. Kendall?" "Yes. Is it correct that you came to the NIH on a 6-month sabbatical 4 years ago?" "Yes, I did." "Was that from May until October?" "I think it was." "What's this about?" "And did you conduct part of your research at the primate facility in Maryland, yes? And is it correct that when you came to the NIH in May of that year, you underwent the usual testing for communicable diseases? Because you were going to do primate research? Yes, Henry said. They had done a battery of tests. Everything from HIV to hepatitis to flu. They'd drawn a lot of blood. May I ask what this is about? I am just filling out some additional paperwork, she said, for Dr. Bellamino. Henry felt a chill. Rob Bellamino was the head of the genetics section of NIH. He hadn't been there 4 years before, when Henry was there, but he was in charge of things now. And he was no particular friend of either Henry or Charlie. Is there some problem? Henry asked. He had the distinct feeling there was. No, she said. We've just misplaced some of our paperwork, and Dr. Bellamino is a stickler about records. While you were at the primate facility, did you do any research involving a female chimpanzee named Mary? Her lab number was F402. You know I don't remember, Henry said. It's a long time back. I worked with several chimps. I don't recall specifically. She was pregnant during that summer. I'm sorry, I just don't remember. That was the summer we had an outbreak of encephalitis. And they had to quarantine most of the chimps. Is that right? Yes, I remember the quarantine. They sent chimps all around the country to different facilities. Thank you, Dr. Kendall. Oh, while I have you on the phone, can I verify your address? We have 348 Marbury Madison Drive, La Jolla. Yes, it is. Thanks for your time, Dr. Kendall. That was the entire conversation. All Henry really thought at the time was that Bellamino was a tricky son of a bitch. You never knew what he was up to. But now, with this primate in Sumatra, Henry shook his head. Charlie Huggins could argue all he wanted, but it was the fact that scientists had already made a transgenic monkey. They'd done it years ago. There were all kinds of transgenic mammals these days. Dogs, cats, everything. It was not out of the question that the talking orang was a transgenic animal. Henry's work at NIH had been concerned with the genetic basis of autism. He'd gone to the primate facility because he wanted to know which genes accounted for the differences in communications abilities between humans and apes. And he had done some work with chimp embryos. It didn't lead anywhere, in fact. He had hardly gotten started before the encephalitis outbreak halted his research. He ended up back at Bethesda and working in the lab for the duration of his sabbatical. That was all he knew. At least all he knew for sure. Humans and chimps interbred until recently. Species split did not end sex, researchers find a controversial result from genetics. Researchers at Harvard and MIT have concluded that the split between human and chimpanzees occurred more recently than previously thought. Gene investigators had long known that apes and human beings both derived from a common ancestor who walked the earth some 18 million years ago. Gibbon split off first 16 million years ago. Orangutans split about 12 million years ago. Gorillas split 10 million years ago. Chimpanzees and human beings were the last to split about 9 million years ago. However, after decoding the human genome in 2001, geneticists discovered that human beings and chimps differed in only 1.5% of their genes, about 500 genes in all. This was far fewer than expected. By 2003, scientists had begun to catalog precisely which genes differed between the species. It is now clear that many structural proteins, including hemoglobin and cytochrome C proteins, are identical in chimps and humans. Human and chimp blood are identical. If the species split 9 million years ago, why are they still so alike? However, geneticists believed humans and chimpanzees continued to interbred long after the species split. Such interbreeding or hybridization puts evolutionary pressure on the X chromosome, causing it to change more rapidly than normal. The researchers found that the newest genes on the human genome appear on the X chromosome. From this, researchers argue that ancestral humans continued to breed with chimps until 5.4 million years ago. When the split became permanent, this new view stands in sharp contrast to the consensus view that once speciation occurs, hybridization is a negligible influence. But according to Dr. David Rake of Harvard, the fact that hybridization has rarely been seen in other species may simply be due to the fact that we have not been looking for it. The Harvard researchers cautioned that interbreeding of humans and chimpanzees is not possible in the present day. They point out that press reports of hybrid chimpanzees have invariably proven false. Chapter 6. Biogen Research Inc. was housed in a titanium-skinned cube in an industrial park outside Westview Village in Southern California, majestically situated above the traffic on the 101 freeway. The cube had been the idea of Biogen's president Rick Dale, who insisted on calling it a hexahedron. The cube looked impressive and high-tech, while revealing absolutely nothing about what went on inside, which is exactly how Dale wanted it. In addition, Biogen maintained 40,000 square feet of nondescript shed space in an industrial park 2 miles away. It was there that the animal storage facilities were located along with the more dangerous labs. Josh Winkler, an up-and-coming young researcher, picked up rubber gloves and a surgical mask from a shelf by the door to the animal quarters. His assistant, Tom Weller, was reading a news clipping taped to the wall. "Let's go, Tom," Josh said. "Dale must be crapping in his pants," Weller said, pointing to the article. "Have you read this?" Josh turned to look. It was an article from the Wall Street Journal. Scientists isolate master gene. A genetic basis for controlling other people. Toulouse, France. A team of French biologists have isolated the gene that drives certain people to attempt to control others. Geneticists at the Biochemical Institute of Toulouse University, headed by Dr. Michael Crichton, announced the discovery at a press conference today. The gene, Dr. Crichton said, is associated with social dominance and strong control over other people. We have isolated it in sports leaders, CEOs, and heads of state. We believe the gene is found in all dictators throughout history. Dr. Poilou explained that while the strong form of the gene produced dictators, the milder heterozygous form produced a moderate, quasi-totalitarian urge to tell other people how to run their lives, generally for their own good or for their own safety. Significantly, on psychological testing, individuals with a mild form will express the view that other people need their insights and are unable to manage their own lives without their guidance. This form of the gene exists among politicians, policy advocates, religious fundamentalists, and celebrities. The belief complex is manifested by a strong feeling of certainty, coupled with a powerful sense of entitlement and a carefully nurtured sense of resentment toward those who don't listen to them. At the same time, he urged caution in interpreting the results. Many people who are driven to control others merely want everybody to be the same as they are. They can't tolerate differences. This explains the team's paradoxical finding that individuals with the mild form of the gene were also the most tolerant of authoritarian environments with strict and invasive social rules. Our study shows that the gene produces not only a bossy person, but also a person willing to be bossed. They have a distinct attraction to totalitarian states. He noted that these people are especially responsive to fashions of all kinds, and suppress opinions and preferences not shared by their group. Joss said, especially responsive to fashions. Is this a joke? No, they're serious. It's marketing, Tom Rella said. Today, everything is marketing. Read the rest. Although the French team stopped short of claiming that the mild form of the master gene represented a genetic disease, an addiction to belonging. As Nasser Jacques Bolilou phrased it, they nevertheless suggested that evolutionary pressures were moving the human race toward ever greater conformity. Unbelievable, Josh said. These guys in Toulouse hold a press conference and the whole world runs their story about the master gene. Have they published in a journal anywhere? Nope. They just held a press conference, no publication, and no mention of publication. What's next? The slave gene? Looks like crap to me, Joss said. He glanced at his watch. You mean we hope it's crap? Yeah, that's what I mean. We hope it's crap, because it gets in the way of what Biogen's announcing, that's for sure. You think Dale will delay the announcement? Tom Weller asked. Maybe, but Dale doesn't like waiting. And he's been nervous ever since he got back from Vegas. Josh tugged on his rubber gloves, put on safety goggles and his paper face mask, then picked up the 6-inch long compressed air cylinder and screwed on the vial of retrovirus. The whole apparatus was the size of a cigar tube. Next, he fitted a tiny plastic cone on top of that, pushing it in place with his thumb. Grab your PDA. And they pushed through the swinging door into the animal quarters. The strong, slightly sweet odor of the rats was a familiar smell. There were 500 or 600 rats here, all neatly labeled in cages stacked 6 feet high on both sides of an aisle that ran down the center of the room. "What are we dosing today?" Tom Weller said. Josh read off a string of numbers. Tom checked his PDA listing of numerical locations. They walked down the aisle until they found the cages with that day's numbers. 5 rats in 5 cages. The animals were white, plump, moving normally. They looked okay. This is the second dose. Right. Okay, boys, Josh said. Let's be nice for Daddy. He opened the first cage and quickly grabbed the rat inside. He held the animal by the body, 4 fingers expertly gripping the neck, and quickly fitted the small plastic cone over the rat's snout. The animal's breath clouded the cone. A brief hiss as the virus was released. Josh held the mask in place for 10 seconds while the rat inhaled. Then he released the animal back into the cage. Run down. Tom Weller taped his stylus on the PDA, then moved to the next cage. The retrovirus had been bioengineered to carry a gene known as ACMPD3N7, one of the family of genes controlling aminocarboxymuconate, paraldehyde decarboxylase. Within Biogen, they called it the maturity gene. When activated, ACMPD3N7 seemed to modify responses to the amygdala and cingulate gyrus in the brain. The result was an acceleration of maturational behavior, at least in rats. Infant female rats, for example, would show precursors of maternal behavior, such as rolling feces in their cages, far earlier than usual, and Biogen had preliminary evidence for the maturational gene action in rhesus monkeys as well. Interest in the gene centered on a potential link to neurodegenerative disease. One school of thought argued that neurodegenerative illnesses were results of disruptions of maturational pathways in the brain. If that were true, if ACMPD3N7 were involved in, say, Alzheimer's disease or any other form of senility, then the commercial value of the gene would be enormous. Josh had moved on to the next cage and was holding the mask over the second rat when his cell phone went off. He gestured for Tom to pull it from his shirt pocket. Willa looked at the screen. "It's your mother," he said. "Ah, hell," Josh said. "Take over for a minute, would you?" "Joshua, what are you doing?" "I'm working, Mom." "Well, can you stop?" "Not really." "Because we have an emergency," Josh sighed. "What did he do this time, Mom?" "I don't know," she said. "But he's in jail, downtown." "Well, let Charles get him out." Charles Silverberg was the family lawyer. "Charles is getting him out right now," his mother said. "But Adam has to appear in court. Somebody has to drive him home after the hearing." "I can't. I'm at work." "He's your brother, Josh." "He's also 30 years old," Josh said. This had been going on for years. His brother Adam was an investment banker who had been in and out of rehab a dozen times. "Can't he take a taxi?" "I don't think that's right under the circumstances." Josh sighed. "What'd he do, Mom?" "Apparently, he bought cocaine from a woman who worked for the DEA." "Again?" "Joshua, are you going to go downtown and pick him up or not?" Long sigh. "Yes, Mom, I'll go." Now, will he go now? "Yes, Mom, I'll go now." He flipped the phone shut and turned to Ella. "What did you say we finish this in a couple of hours?" "No problem," Tom said. "I have some notes to write up back in the office. Anyway." Joshua turned, stripping off his gloves as he left the room. He stuck his cylinder, goggles, and paper mask into the pocket of his lab coat, unclipped his radiation tag, and hurried to his car. Driving downtown, he glanced at the cylinder protruding from the lab coat, which he had tossed onto the passenger's seat. To stay within the protocol, Josh had to return to the lab and expose the remaining rats before 5 p.m. That kind of schedule and the need to keep to it seemed to represent everything that separated Josh from his older brother. Once Adam had everything: looks, popularity, athletic prowess. His high school days at the elite Westfield School had consisted of one triumph after another. Editor of the newspaper soccer team, captain president of the debating team, national merit scholar, Josh, in contrast, had been a nerd. He was chubby, short, ungainly. He walked with a kind of waddle. He couldn't help it. The orthopedic shoes his mother insisted he wear did not help. Girls disdained him. He heard them giggle as he passed them in the hallways. High school was torture for Josh. He did not do well. Adam went to Yale. Josh barely got into Emerson State. How times had changed. A year ago, Adam had been fired from his job at Dutch Bank. His drug troubles were endless. Meanwhile, Josh had started at Biogen as a lowly assistant, but had quickly moved up as the company began to recognize his hard work. and his inventive approach. Josh had stock in the company, and if any of the current projects, including the maturity gene, proved out commercially, then he would be rich. And Adam. Josh pulled up in front of the courthouse. Adam was sitting on the steps, staring fixedly at the ground. His ratty suit was streaked with grime, and he had a day's growth of beard. Charles Silverberg was standing over him, talking on his cell phone. Josh honked the horn. Charles waved and headed off. Adam trudged over and got in the car. "Thanks, bro." He slammed the door shut. "Appreciate it." "No problem." Josh pulled into traffic, glancing at his watch. He had enough time to take Adam back to their mother's house and get back to the lab by 5. "Did I interrupt something?" Adam asked. That was the annoying thing about his brother. He liked to mess up everyone else's life too. He seemed to take pleasure in it. "Yes, actually you did. Sorry." "Sorry? If you were sorry, you'd stop doing this shit." "Hey man," Adam said. "How the fuck was I supposed to know? It was entrapment, man. Even Charles said so. The bitch entrapped me. Charles said he would get me off easy." "That wouldn't be an entrapment," Josh said. "If you weren't using..." "Oh, go fuck yourself. Don't lecture me." Josh said nothing. Why did he even bring it up? After all these years, he knew nothing he said mattered. Nothing made a difference. There was a long silence as he drove. "I'm sorry," Adam said. "You're not sorry." "Yeah, you're right," Adam said. "You're right." He hung his head. He sighed theatrically. "I fucked up again." The repentant Adam. Just had seen it dozens of times before. The belligerent Adam, the repentant Adam, the logical Adam, the denying Adam. Meanwhile, his brother always tested positive every time. An orange light came out on the dashboard. Gas was low. He saw a station up ahead. "I need gas." "Good, I got to take a leak." "You will stay in the car." "I got to take a leak, man." "Stay in the fucking car." Josh pulled up alongside the pump and got out. "Stay where I can fucking see you." "I don't want to pee in your car, man." "You better not, but just hold it, Adam." Josh put a credit card in the slot and started pumping gas. He glanced at his brother through the rear windshield, then looked back at the spinning numbers. Gas was so damn expensive now. He probably should buy a car that was cheaper to run. He finished and got back in the car. He glanced at Adam. His brother had a funny look on his face. There was a faint odor in the car. "Adam, what? What did you do?" "Nothing." He started the engine. That smell. Something silver caught his eye. He looked at the floor between his brother's feet and saw the silver cylinder. He leaned over, picked up the cylinder. It was light in his hand. "Adam, I didn't do anything." Josh shook the cylinder. It was empty. "I thought it was nitrous or something," his brother said. "You asshole." "Why? I didn't do anything." "It's for a rat, Adam. You just inhaled virus for a rat." Adam slumped back. "Is that bad?" "It ain't good." By the time Josh pulled up in front of his mother's house in Beverly Hills, he had thought it through and concluded that there was no danger to Adam. The retrovirus was a mouse infective strain, and while it might also infect human beings, the dose had been calculated for an animal weighing 800 grams. His brother weighed 100 times as much. The genetic exposure was subclinical. So I'm okay, Adam said. Yeah, sure, yeah. Sorry about that, Adam said, getting out of the car. But thanks for picking me up. See you, bro. I'll wait until you get inside, Josh said. He watched as his brother walked up the drive and knocked on the door. His mother opened it. Adam stepped inside, and she shut the door. She never even looked at Josh. He started the engine and drove away. Chapter 7. At noon, Alex Burnett left her office in her Century City law firm and went home. She didn't have far to go. She lived in an apartment on Roxbury Park with her 8-year-old son, Jamie. Jamie had a cold and had stayed home from school. Her father was looking after him for her. She found her dad in the kitchen, making macaroni and cheese. It was the only thing Jamie would eat these days. How is he? She said. Fever's down, still got a runny nose and a cough. Is he hungry? He wasn't earlier, but he asked for macaroni. That's a good sign, she said. Should I take over? Her father shook his head. I've got it handled. You didn't have to come home, you know. I know, she paused. The judge issued his rulings, Dad. When? This morning, and we lost. Her father continued to stir. We lost everything? Yes, she said. We lost on every point. You have no rights to your own tissue. He ruled them material waste that you allowed the university to dispose of for you. The court says you have no rights to any of your tissues once it has left your body. The university can do what it wants with it. But they brought me back. He said a reasonable person would have realized the tissues were being collected for commercial use. Therefore, you tacitly accepted it. But they told me I was sick. He rejected all our arguments, Dad. They lied to me. I know, but according to the judge, good social policy promotes medical research. Granting you rights now would have a chilling effect on future research. That's the thinking behind the ruling. The common good. This wasn't about the common good. It was about getting rich, her father said. Jesus, $3 billion. I know, Dad. Universities want money. And basically, this judge held what California judges have held for the last 25 years. Ever since the Moore decision in 1980. Just like your case, the court found that Moore's tissues were waste materials too, which he had no right. And they haven't revisited that question in more than 2 decades. So what happens now? We appeal, she said. I don't think we have good grounds, but we have to do it before we can go to the California Supreme Court. And when would that be? A year from now. Do we have a chance? Her father said. Absolutely not, Albert Rodriguez said, turning in his chair towards her father's. Rodriguez and the other UCLA attorneys had come to Alex's law offices in the aftermath of the judge's ruling. "You have no chance on further appeal, Mr. Burnett." "I'm surprised," Alex said, "that you're so confident about how the California Supreme Court will rule." "Oh, we have no idea how they will rule," Rodriguez said. "I simply mean that you will lose this case no matter what the court holds." "How is that?" Alex said. "UCLA is a state university. The Board of Regents is prepared on behalf of the state of California to take your father's cells by right of eminent domain." She blinked. "What?" "Should the Supreme Court rule that your father's cells are his property, which we think is unlikely, the state will take ownership of his property by eminent domain." Eminent domain referred to the right of the state to take private property without the owner's consent. It was almost always invoked for public uses, but eminent domain is intended for schools or highways. "The state can do it in this case," Rodriguez said, "and it will." Her father stared at them, thunderstruck. "Are you joking?" "No, Mr. Burnett. It's a legitimate taking, and the state will exercise its right." Alex said, "Then what is the purpose of this meeting?" "We thought it appropriate to inform you of the situation in case you wanted to drop further litigations." "You're suggesting we end litigation?" she said. "I would advise it," Rodriguez said to her. "If this were my client, ending litigation saves the state considerable expense." "It saves everyone's expense," Rodriguez said. "So what are you proposing as a settlement? For us to drop the case?" "Nothing whatever, Miss Burnett. I'm sorry if you misunderstood me. This is not a negotiation. We are simply here to explain our position so that you can make an informed decision in your best interest." Her father cleared his throat. "You're telling us that you're taking my cells no matter what. You sold them for $3 billion, no matter what. And you're keeping all of that money no matter what?" "Bluntly put," Rodriguez said, "but not inaccurate." The meeting ended. Rodriguez and his team thanked them for their time, said their goodbyes, and left the room. Alex nodded to her father, and then followed the other attorneys outside. Through the glass, Frank Burnett watched as they talked further. "Those fuckers," he said. "What kind of world do we live in?" "My sentiments exactly," said a voice from behind him. Burnett turned. A young man wearing horn-rimmed glasses was sitting in the far corner of the conference room. Burnett remembered him. He had come in during the meeting, bringing coffee and mugs, which he had put on the sideboard. Then he had sat down in the corner for the rest of the meeting. Burnett had assumed he was a junior member of the firm, but now the young man was speaking with confidence. "Let's face it, Mr. Burnett," he said. "You've been screwed. It turns out your cells are very rare and valuable. They're efficient manufacturers of cytokines, chemicals that fight cancer. That's the real reason you survived your disease. As a matter of fact, your cells churn out cytokines more efficiently than any commercial process." That's why those cells are worth so much money. The UCLA doctors didn't create anything or invent anything. They didn't genetically modify anything. They just took your cells, grew them in a dish, and sold the dish to Biogen. And you, my friend, were screwed. Who are you? Burnett said. And you have no hope of justice, the young man continued, because the courts are totally incompetent. The courts don't realize how fast things are changing. They don't understand we are already in a new world. They don't get the new issues. Because they are technically illiterate. They don't understand what procedures are done. Or in this case, not done. Your cells were stolen and sold, plain and simple, and the court decided that it was just fine. Burnett gave a long sigh. But, the man continued, thieves can still get their comeuppance. How's that? Because UCLA did nothing to change your cells. Another company could take those same cells and make minor genetic modifications and sell them as a new product. But Biogen already has my cells. True, but cells lines are fragile. Things happen to them. What do you mean? Cultures are vulnerable to fungus, bacterial infections, contamination, mutation. All kinds of things can go wrong. Biogen must take precautions, of course, but sometimes the precautions are inadequate, the man said. Who are you? Burnett said again. He was looking around through the glass walls of the conference room. At the larger office outside, he saw people walking back and forth. He wondered where his daughter had gone. I'm nobody, the young man said. You never met me. You have a business card? The man shook his head. I'm not here, Mr. Burnett. Burnett frowned, and my daughter has no idea. Never met her. This is between us. But you're talking about illegal activity. I'm not talking at all, because you and I have never met, the man said. But let's consider how things might work. Okay. You can't legally sell your cells at this point, because the court has ruled you no longer own them. Biogen does. But your cells could be obtained from other places. Over the course of your life, you've given blood many times in many places. You went to Vietnam 32 years ago. The army took your blood. You had knee surgery 20 years ago in San Diego. The hospital took your blood and kept your cartilage. You've consulted various doctors over the years. They ran blood tests. The labs kept the blood, so your blood can be found. No problem. And it can be acquired from publicity available databases. If, for example, another company wanted to use your cells, and what about Biogen? The young man shrugged. Biotechnology is a difficult business. Contaminations happen every day. If something goes wrong in their labs, that's not your problem, is it? But how could? I have no idea. So many things can happen. There was a short silence. And why should I do this? Burnett said. You'll get $100 million for what? Punch biopsies of 6 organ systems. I thought you could get my blood elsewhere. In theory. If it came to litigations, that would be claimed. But in practice, any company would want fresh cells. I don't know what to say. No problem. Think it over, Mr. Bennett. The young man stood, pushed his glasses up his nose. You may have been screwed, but there's no reasons to bend over for it. From Vermont College Alumni News. Stem cell debate rages. Effective treatments decades away. Professor McNone shocks audience by Max Thaler. Speaking to the packed audience in Beaumont Hall, famed biology professor Kevin McKeown shocked listeners by calling stem cell researchers a cruel fraud. What you have been told is nothing more than a myth, he said, intended to ensure funding for researchers at the expense of false hopes for the seriously ill. So let's get to the truth. Stem cells, he explained, are cells that have the ability to turn themselves into other kinds of cells. There are two kinds of stem cells. Adult stem cells are found throughout the body. They are found in muscles, brain, and liver tissues, and so on. Adult stem cells can generate new cells, but only of the tissue in which they are found. They are important because the human body replaces all its cells every 7 years. Research involving adult stem cells is, for the most part, not controversial, but there is another kind of stem cell, the embryonic stem cell, that is highly controversial. It is found in umbilical cord blood, or derived from young embryos. Embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, meaning they can develop into any kind of tissue. But the research is controversial because it involves the use of human embryos, which many people feel for religious and other reasons have the rights of human beings. This is an old debate not likely to be resolved soon. Scientists see a ban on research. The current American administration has said that embryonic stem cells can be taken from existing research lines, but not from new embryos. Scientists regard existing lines as inadequate, and thus view the ruling a de facto ban on research. That's why they are going to private centers to carry out their research without federal grants. But in the end, the real problem isn't simply a lack of stem cells. It's the fact that in order to produce therapeutic effects, scientists need each person to have his or her own pluripotent stem cells. This would allow us to regrow an organ, or to repair damage from injury or disease, or to undo paralysis. This represents the great dream. No one is able to perform these therapeutic miracles now. No one even has an inkling how it might be done. But it requires the cells. Now, for newborns, you can collect umbilical cord blood and freeze it. And people are doing that with their newborns. But what about adults? Where will we get pluripotent stem cells? That's the big question. Toward the therapeutic dream. All we adults have left is adult stem cells, which can make only one kind of tissue. But what if there were a way to convert adult stem cells back into embryonic stem cells? Such a procedure would enable every adult to have a ready source of his or her own embryonic stem cells. That would make the therapeutic dream possible. Well, it turns out that you can reverse adult stem cells, but only if you insert them into an egg. Everything within the egg unwinds the differentiation and converts the adult stem cells back into an embryonic stem cell. This is good news, but it is vastly more difficult to do with human cells. And if the method could be made to work in human beings, it would require an enormous supply of human egg cells. That makes the procedure controversial again. So scientists are looking for other ways to make adult cells pluripotent. It is a worldwide effort. A researcher in Shanghai has been injecting human stem cells into chicken eggs, with mixed results. While others cluck in disapproval, it's not clear now whether such procedures will work. It's equally unclear whether the stem cell dream, transplants without rejection, spinal cord injuries repaired, and so on, will come true. Advocates have made dishonest claims, and media speculation has been fantastical for years. People with serious illnesses have been led to believe a cure is just around the corner. Sadly, this is not true. Working therapeutic approaches lie many years in the future, perhaps decades. Many thoughtful scientists have said in private that we won't know whether stem cell therapy will work until 2050. They point out that it took 40 years from the time Watson and Crick decoded the gene until human gene therapy began. A scandal shocks the world. It was in the context of feverish hope and hype that Korean biochemist Hwang Woo-suk announced in 2004 that he had successfully created a human embryonic stem cell from an adult cell by somatic nuclear transfer, injections into a human egg. Hwang was a famous workaholic, spending 18 hours a day, 7 days a week in the lab. Hwang's exciting report was published in March 2005 in Science magazine. Researchers from around the world flocked to Korea. Human stem cells treatment seemed suddenly on the verge of reality. Hwang was a hero in Korea and appointed to head a new world stem cell hub, financed by the Korean government. But in November of 2005, an American collaborator in Pittsburgh announced that he was ending his association with Hwang. And then one of Hwang's co-workers revealed that Hwang had obtained eggs illegally from women who worked in his lab. By December 2005, Seoul National University announced that Hwang's cell lines were a fabrication, as were his papers in Science. Science retracted the papers. Hwang now faces criminal charges. There the matter stands. Pillars of media hype. What lessons can be drawn from this? Asked Professor McCone. First, in the media-saturated world, persistent hype lends unwarranted credulity to the wildest claims. For years, the media have touted stem cell research as the coming miracle. So when somebody announced that the miracle had arrived, he was believed. Does that imply there's a danger in media hype? You bet. Because not only does it raise cruel hopes among the ill, it affects scientists too. They start to believe the miracle is around the corner, even though they should know better. What can we do about media hype? It would stop in a week. If scientific institutions wanted that, they don't. They love the hype. They know it brings grants, so that won't change. Yale, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins promote hype just as much as Exxon or Ford. So do individual researchers at those institutions. And increasingly, researchers and universities are all commercially motivated, just like corporations. So whenever you hear a scientist claim that his statements have been exaggerated or taken out of context, just ask him if he was written a letter of protest to the editor. 99 times out of 100, he hasn't. Next lesson. Peer review. All of Herring's papers in Science were peer reviewed. If we ever needed evidence that peer review is an empty ritual, this episode provides it. Herring made extraordinary claims. He did not provide extraordinary evidence. Many studies have shown that peer review does not improve the quality of scientific papers. Scientists themselves know it doesn't work. Yet the public still regards it as a sign of quality and says, this paper was peer-reviewed, or this paper was not peer-reviewed, as if that meant something. It doesn't. Next, the journals themselves. Where was the firm hand of the editor of Science? Remember that the journal Science is a big enterprise. 115 people work on that magazine, yet gross fraud, including photographs altered with Adobe Photoshop, were not detected, and Photoshop is widely known as a major tool of scientific fraud. Yet the magazine had no way to detect it. Not that Science is unique in being fooled. Fraudulent research has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, where authors withheld critical information about Vioxx heart attacks, in the Lancet, where a report about drugs and oral cancer was entirely fabricated. In that one, 250 people in the patient database had the same birth date. That might have been a clue. Medical fraud is more than a scandal. It's a public health threat. Yet it continues. The cost of fraud. The cost of such fraud is enormous, McCune said, estimated at $30 billion annually. Probably 3 times that. Fraud in science is not rare, and is not limited to fringe players. The most respected researchers and institutions have been caught with faked data. Even Francis Collins, the head of NIH Human Genome Project, was listed as co-author on 5 faked papers that had to be withdrawn. The ultimate lesson is that science isn't special, at least not anymore. Maybe back when Einstein talked to Niels Bohr, and there were only a few dozen important workers in every field. But there are now 3 million researchers in America. It's no longer a calling, it's a career. Science is as corruptible a human activity as any other. Its practitioners aren't saints. they are human beings, and they do what human beings do: lie, cheat, steal from one another, sue, hide data, fake data, overstate their own importance, and denigrate opposing views unfairly. That's human nature. It isn't going to change.